Over 1.5 million Australian households are at risk of losing their homes in 2025. Sounds unbelievable? It's not. From surging interest rates to extreme weather disasters, the pressure is building, and fast. Families who've owned their homes for decades are now just months away from foreclosure. Renters are being priced out overnight, and in some suburbs, house prices are collapsing while mortgage payments are skyrocketing. It's a crisis most don't see coming until it hits their own front door. But here's the twist. This isn't just about money. It's about a system buckling under 10 different forces all hitting at once. In this video, we'll break down 10 shocking reasons why millions could be pushed out of their homes and what you can do to prepare. Some of these reasons are hidden in plain sight. Others will genuinely surprise you. So stick around, because what's coming could affect you, your family, or someone you love. Number 10. Cost of living crisis. The cost of living crisis is hitting Australians harder than ever before. And it's not just tightening belts, it's pushing people out of their homes. In 2025, the basic expenses of daily life, food, electricity, fuel, healthcare, and childcare, have become so high that many families simply can't keep up. Even middle-income earners, who once felt financially secure, are now turning to charities and food banks just to survive. Recent reports from the Australian Bureau of Statistics show that household expenses have outpaced income growth for 3 years in a row. That means even if you're working full-time, you're likely earning less in real terms than you did a few years ago. And if you're renting or paying a mortgage, chances are more than half your income is going just to keep a roof over your head. But here's where it gets worse. Rising energy prices and supermarket inflation are forcing people to choose between paying rent or feeding their families. Imagine having to skip meals just to avoid eviction. That's now a reality for thousands, and it's only getting worse. This crisis doesn't just impact low-income earners. Young professionals, single parents, the elderly, and small business owners are all feeling the squeeze. And when every dollar is stretched to the limit, a single unexpected bill, like a car repair or medical emergency, can be enough to cause a rental default or mortgage arrears. Governments have introduced support payments and subsidies, but in most cases, they're not enough to keep up with the pace of inflation. As prices rise and support stagnates, the number of forced evictions and foreclosures is expected to spike dramatically in 2025. This isn't just a housing issue, it's a full-blown survival crisis, and unless urgent action is taken, millions of Australians will be priced out of living itself, let alone owning or renting a home. Number 9. Government policy inaction. One of the most frustrating and dangerous drivers of Australia's looming housing catastrophe is government policy inaction. While the signs of a housing crisis have been clear for years, meaningful change has been slow, reactive, and often too little, too late. In many ways, it feels like politicians are watching the house burn down, but instead of grabbing a hose, they're debating what kind of water to use. Despite promises of affordability, first-home buyer incentives, and housing targets, actual construction of affordable homes continues to fall short. Key housing programs are delayed or tied up in red tape. Public housing stock continues to shrink, while rental protections vary wildly between states, leaving tenants vulnerable to sudden evictions and massive rent hikes. Meanwhile, landlords and investors enjoy generous tax breaks like negative gearing, which critics say inflates property prices and keeps the market out of reach for everyday Australians. The truth is, many policies are designed to protect the housing market, not the people living in it. Politicians fear the backlash of falling property prices because for many Australians, their home is their biggest asset. But this short-term thinking means long-term pain. Young people are locked out of ownership, and renters are left to fend for themselves in a broken system. Experts have repeatedly called for bold reforms, like national rent controls, large-scale social housing investment, and tighter regulation of property investors. But political will is lacking. Decisions are often driven by election cycles, not real solutions. And while announcements are made, implementation is slow, buried in bureaucracy, or quietly dropped. The result? A system that continues to fail the people who need it most. Without decisive forward-thinking action, government inaction won't just be a problem. It will be one of the main reasons millions of Australians lose their homes in 2025. Number 8. Investor pressure evictions. In today's brutal housing landscape, property investors are tightening the noose, and everyday renters are the ones suffocating. As housing demand soars and rental supply dwindles, landlords are seizing the moment to cash in, pushing up rents to record highs or evicting tenants altogether in search of higher-paying occupants or quick property flips. Many Australians don't realize just how much power investors now hold. Over 30% of all residential properties in Australia are owned by investors, not homeowners, and as interest rates rise, these investors are looking to protect their profits, often at the expense of the people living in their properties. That means more no-fault evictions, more sudden rental increases, and more families left scrambling with nowhere to go. In states without strong tenant protections, renters can be evicted with just a few weeks' notice, even if they've always paid on time. It's legal, it's happening more often, and it's pushing vulnerable people, single parents, students, pensioners, into homelessness. There's also a growing trend of rent evictions, where landlords claim they need to renovate a property, evict the current tenants, and then relist it at a much higher rent. These tactics are legal loopholes that allow for profit-driven displacement, and they're being used more aggressively in 2025 than ever before. Meanwhile, property flipping is on the rise. Investors are buying up homes, quickly renovating or holding them just long enough to benefit from market gains, and then reselling for profit, often at the cost of tenant stability. This churn creates a sense of constant instability for renters who feel like they're one rent hike away from the streets. Unless stronger rental protections are introduced and enforced, investor pressure will continue to drive mass evictions, and millions of renters could find themselves out of options and out of a home before the year ends. Number 7. The mortgage prison trap. Imagine this. You're stuck in a home you can't afford, with a mortgage you can't escape. That's the reality for thousands of Australians trapped in what's now being called the mortgage prison. It sounds dramatic, but for many, it's a financial nightmare that's becoming increasingly common in 2025. The term refers to homeowners who are unable to refinance their mortgage even though they're struggling to keep up with repayments. Why can't they switch? Because their property has dropped in value, or their income no longer meets the strict criteria set by banks under tougher lending rules. In other words, even if another lender offers a better deal, they don't qualify, so they're locked in with higher interest rates, rising repayments, and no way out. This trap is especially brutal for people who bought homes at the peak of the market, often with low fixed-rate loans. Now that interest rates have spiked, their repayments have doubled, or worse. But because their home is worth less than what they owe, their loan-to-value ratio is too high to refinance. The banks see them as too risky, even though they've never missed a payment. It's a perfect storm. Falling house prices, rising rates, and strict lending rules all working against homeowners. And unlike renters, they can't just move. Selling the house often means selling at a loss and still owing the bank money. For many, the only option is to keep paying until they can't, then face foreclosure. Financial stress, anxiety, and even depression are on the rise among those stuck in mortgage prison. And with more fixed-rate loans set to expire in 2025, this crisis is far from over. Without targeted support, more Australians will become financial prisoners in their own homes, teetering on the edge of default with no escape route in sight. Number 6. Decline of social housing. For decades, social housing has been the safety net for Australians who can't afford to rent or buy on the open market. But in 2025, that net is fraying fast, and in some places, it's already disappeared. The slow, steady decline of social housing is now one of the most alarming factors driving the housing crisis, pushing more people into homelessness or unsafe living conditions. Australia has lost tens of thousands of public and community housing dwellings over the past decade. While the population continues to grow, the number of available social housing properties hasn't kept pace. In fact, less than 4% of all housing in Australia is social housing, a sharp drop from previous generations. The waiting lists are shocking. In some states, people are waiting up to 10 years just to be considered for a place. That's not a system in crisis, it's a system that's barely functioning. This shortage hits the most vulnerable groups the hardest: single parents, people with disabilities, elderly residents, indigenous communities, and those escaping domestic violence. Without access to affordable, stable housing, these people often end up in overcrowded homes, temporary shelters, or on the streets. What's worse is that some governments have sold off public housing stock to private developers, promising new builds that are often delayed or never happen. Others have shifted focus to short-term rental subsidies, which may help in the moment but do nothing to fix the root problem: a lack of actual housing. Without serious investment in building long-term, affordable, government-backed homes, the situation will only get worse. By 2025, experts warn that social housing is on the verge of collapse, and without it, millions who once relied on it will have nowhere left to turn. In a country as wealthy as Australia, the erosion of social housing is not just a policy failure, it's a national disgrace. Number 5. Housing supply shortage. At the heart of Australia's housing crisis lies a critical problem that's been years in the making, a severe shortage of housing supply. Quite simply, there are not enough homes being built to meet the growing demand, and it's pushing prices and rents through the roof. The government's own target was to build 1.2 million new homes by 2029, but in 2025, that goal is already falling behind by nearly 40% in some states. Why? A perfect storm of issues. Rising construction costs, labor shortages, supply chain delays, and countless planning red tape. Small and medium-sized builders, which make up the backbone of the industry, are going bust at alarming rates. When builders disappear, so do the homes they were meant to complete. At the same time, population growth, driven by both natural increase and immigration, is adding tens of thousands of new residents each year. These people all need somewhere to live, but the supply simply isn't catching up. This imbalance means fewer available homes, bidding wars among renters, and young Australians being completely locked out of the property market. And let's not forget the growing trend of short-term rentals like Airbnb, which are removing even more properties from the long-term rental pool, especially in tourist hotspots and inner-city areas. While these platforms offer income for investors, they're shrinking the available housing stock for locals. Even when new housing developments are approved, the process can take years, and often, what gets built is luxury apartments or investor stock, not affordable homes for working families. Unless urgent reforms are made to streamline development, support smaller builders, and prioritize affordable housing, the shortage will continue to worsen, and when there aren't enough homes to go around, the result is simple but devastating: higher prices, more competition, and millions left without a place to live. Number 4. Soaring rent prices. If you're renting in Australia right now, you already know the pain. Rent prices are out of control. Across major cities and even regional areas, the cost of renting a home has skyrocketed, making it one of the most urgent and widespread threats to housing security in 2025. In some suburbs, rents have gone up by 30% or more in just 2 years, and the trend shows no signs of slowing down. Nationally, vacancy rates are at record lows, often sitting below 1%, which means renters are fighting tooth and nail for every available property. People are attending open inspections with dozens of other applicants, offering to pay above the asking price or months of rent in advance, just to secure a place to live. In this kind of environment, landlords hold all the power, and many are taking full advantage. This rent surge is forcing families to make impossible choices. Some are moving into overcrowded homes, bunking with friends or relatives, or even sleeping in cars and tents. Others are being pushed out of cities entirely, relocating to regional areas, only to find the rent crisis has spread there too. Teachers, nurses, and essential workers are now being priced out of the communities they serve. What's driving it? A lack of rental properties, a growing population, and investors cashing in on the demand. Many landlords are also passing on the rising cost of interest rates and maintenance to tenants. And without strong rent caps or regulations in most states, they can raise prices almost unchecked. Unless rental affordability is addressed head-on, with policy reform, rent controls, and increased housing supply, millions of Australians will continue to struggle. And for many renters, the question isn't, can I afford this home anymore? It's, how long until I'm forced to leave it? Number 3. Climate change and flood-prone zones. As climate change accelerates, it's not just the environment that's under threat. Our homes are too. In 2025, 1 in every 25 homes in Australia is located in a flood-prone area, and that number is rising fast. With more frequent and intense weather events, floods, storms, bushfires, and coastal erosion, millions of properties are now at high risk of damage or total loss, and the financial consequences are devastating. In the past few years alone, extreme weather has displaced tens of thousands of Australians, many of whom never returned to their homes. Entire suburbs have been declared uninsurable because insurance companies no longer want to take the risk. For those who can still get coverage, premiums have tripled, making it nearly impossible for the average household to afford protection. This has huge implications for mortgages as well. Banks are becoming increasingly hesitant to lend in high-risk zones, and some homeowners are finding their properties impossible to sell. Others are discovering that after a natural disaster, repair costs exceed the value of the home, leaving them deep in debt and without a livable property. Worse still, many people living in these danger zones are unaware of the risks. Flood maps are often outdated, and climate risks aren't always disclosed during the sale process. It's only after disaster strikes that families realize they've been left holding the bag. This issue isn't just about where we live, it's about whether we can live safely at all. Without urgent investment in climate-resilient infrastructure, updated zoning laws, and transparent property risk reporting, more Australians will find themselves living in homes that are literally uninhabitable. Climate change isn't a distant threat. It's already reshaping Australia's housing market, and for thousands of homeowners, it's turning their biggest asset into their biggest liability. Number 2. Stagnant wage growth. While the cost of everything from groceries to housing continues to climb, one thing in Australia has barely moved: wages. For years, Australians have been facing stagnant wage growth, and in 2025, it's become one of the biggest threats to housing stability. When your paycheck stays the same, but your rent, mortgage, bills, and basic living expenses rise every few months, the math simply doesn't add up. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, real wages, that's wages adjusted for inflation, have actually declined over the past several years. So even if you're earning more on paper, your money buys less than it did a decade ago. This wage stagnation is especially painful when combined with interest rate hikes, record high rents, and skyrocketing household costs. Many families are now spending over 50% of their income on housing, leaving little to nothing for savings, emergencies, or even basic needs. And it's not just low-income earners. Teachers, nurses, hospitality workers, and even some professionals are struggling to stay afloat. Job insecurity, casual contracts, and lack of wage bargaining power are making it harder for workers to demand better pay, even as profits for big corporations hit record highs. The result? Millions are stuck living paycheck to paycheck, constantly on edge, knowing that one unexpected expense could push them over the edge. Without wage growth, people can't save for a deposit, can't qualify for loans, and can't keep up with rising rents or mortgage repayments. Government wage policies and industrial relations reforms have so far failed to deliver meaningful change. Until wages begin to rise in line with the cost of living, the housing crisis will only deepen. For many Australians, it's not just about affording a home anymore. It's about being able to survive in one. Number 1. Skyrocketing interest rates. Of all the pressures squeezing Australian households in 2025, skyrocketing interest rates may be the most immediate and painful. After years of historically low rates, the Reserve Bank has launched a series of aggressive hikes to combat inflation. But while these increases may help cool the economy, they're heating up financial stress for millions of homeowners. In just over 2 years, interest rates have more than doubled. For the average mortgage holder, that's translated into hundreds, if not thousands, of extra dollars in repayments every month. Families who budgeted carefully when rates were low are now being crushed under the weight of higher repayments. Many are falling behind, and thousands more are sitting on the edge of default. This is especially dangerous for those coming off fixed-rate mortgages. Known as the mortgage cliff, these homeowners are suddenly jumping from ultra-low rates to some of the highest in over a decade. The financial shock is immediate and often devastating. Worse still, rising rates don't just affect mortgages. They impact credit card interest, personal loans, and business finance, putting even more pressure on household budgets. Combine that with rising utility bills, groceries, and fuel, and it's easy to see why many Australians are being forced to choose between paying the bank or putting food on the table. Refinancing, once a way out, is now harder than ever. Stricter lending standards, falling property values, and higher debt-to-income ratios mean many people are being locked into unaffordable loans, a financial trap with no easy escape. Without urgent intervention, like targeted relief, interest rate buffers, or improved lending flexibility, more and more Australians will face foreclosure. Skyrocketing interest rates aren't just a headline, they're a crushing, day-to-day reality that's turning ownership from a dream into a ticking time bomb. For millions, 2025 could be the year that bomb goes off. As we've seen, the warning signs are everywhere. Skyrocketing interest rates, stagnant wages, soaring rents, climate risks, and a housing supply crisis, all converging into what could become the biggest housing disaster Australia has seen in decades. This isn't just about real estate or economics. It's about real people, families being forced out of their homes, young couples giving up on the dream of ownership, elderly Australians unsure where they'll live next, and unless urgent coordinated action is taken, millions more could be swept into homelessness or housing insecurity in 2025. But this crisis isn't unstoppable. Knowledge is power, and now you understand the 10 major forces driving this catastrophe. From broken policies and investor greed to the silent toll of climate change and financial stress, these issues are complex, but not beyond fixing. Governments need to act faster. Banks and lenders must become more flexible, And as individuals, we need to stay informed, speak up, and support policies and leaders who prioritize housing justice over market profits. If you're feeling the pressure yourself, know that you're not alone. There are support services, financial counselors, and community programs available. Don't wait until things fall apart. Get help early. And if you found this video helpful, don't just scroll away. Hit the like button, subscribe, and share your story in the comments. How is the housing crisis affecting you or your community? Your voice matters, and sharing it helps others feel seen. Also, check out our next video, 5 Financial Lifeboats Australians Should Consider Before 2025, where we break down practical strategies to protect yourself in these uncertain times. Because the truth is, the housing crisis isn't coming, it's already here, and the more we understand it, the better chance we have of surviving it and changing it.